aqui no nosso relógio, e como a gente tem o horário de todos já reservado, já temos aqui bastante pessoas dentro da sala, vamos começar. Então, para quem ainda não me conhece, prazer, eu sou Marcelo Souza, sou responsável pela operação da Thomas International aqui no Brasil, e neste ano, como estamos completando 30 anos de Brasil, estamos fazendo uma série de webinars sobre os mais variados temas, todos envolvendo gestão de pessoas, e temos hoje aqui a honra e o prazer de ter conosco o Stephen Cuppello. Bom dia, Stephen. O Stephen é o chefe da nossa equipe de psicologia que trabalha lá na Thomas, lá na Inglaterra. Ele é responsável pela equipe que faz todas as pesquisas do desenvolvimento de produtos da Thomas. É um grande estudioso da área de psicometria, psicólogo, e está agora terminando o seu PhD. Ele escolheu o Brasil para terminar a sua tese de mestrado, de doutorado, me desculpa, já está terminando o PhD, e está aqui com a gente para conversar um pouquinho sobre temas que ele tem tratado na sua tese de doutorado, que é como o viés inconsciente interfere na nossa tomada de decisão. E aí ele vai fazer aqui hoje com a gente a palestra que ele fez no Concar semana passada. Então, vocês que não tiveram a chance de ir lá para Florianópolis assistir a palestra, terão a chance de ouvi-la aqui ao vivo. Então, já sem mais delongas, vou passar a palavra para o Stephen, e agora, como a gente conversou, será tudo em inglês. Quem não tiver facilidade, já ativa aí a opção da tradução automática. Quem tiver dúvida, só chamar a gente aqui no chat. O chat vai estar aberto o tempo todo para vocês poderem fazer perguntas e participar, e na medida do possível, o Stephen vai respondendo. No final, também teremos um momento para responder possíveis dúvidas que vocês têm. Ok? Então, Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for being with us, sharing all the ideas and all the data that you collected in all the researches you made. And please, feel free.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with everyone today. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Here we are. So I think as Marcelo described, I manage the global psychology team at Thomas International. One of the areas that we're really, really interested in is diversity and inclusion, and it's something that's at the heart of everything that we do. And that's what I'm really keen to speak to you all about today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here in Brazil to be able to speak to you, so thank you all for joining. The first thing I want to do, and I think it's really important to do this when talking about diversity and inclusion, is to acknowledge my own perspective. I'm a white man, and so I'm not able to speak to the perspectives of groups that I don't belong to, that I haven't got those lived experiences. The experience I'm here to speak to is the experience of a psychologist that does research in this area, that has learned from a lot of research that I've seen, and that's what I want to share with you today. So I hope it'll be an interesting and fun topic, and I hope it will get people thinking and some good conversations off the back of this. The first thing to probably introduce is, to make sure we're all on the same page, is what is diversity and inclusion. So simply diversity in terms of making sure that your organization has people from different backgrounds, that people have equal opportunities to work in your organization. And inclusion, making sure that everyone is able to be their authentic selves at work, that everyone feels included and part of the organization, and that they can be who they are at work. The case for this that usually comes to mind is the social case, that people should have equal opportunities to get a job that they love, that we want the best people in a role, not just the people that have the most privilege. With the commercial side of this conversation, the business impetus for this is growing and growing. There's a lot of research out there, and this research is growing exponentially. Effectively, when you have diverse groups of people have different perspectives, different lived experiences, and they bring different things to the table. What that means is you have different ideas, you have conflicts. You have people disagreeing on things, people discussing things more. And ultimately what that research has shown is that leads to the teams making better decisions and also more innovative decisions. And the research has shown that this gives companies a competitive advantage. And ultimately, businesses that perform better in terms of diversity and inclusion financially outperform other organizations. Throughout this presentation, there are a few pieces of research that I found that I put in brackets with numbers. So there's 4 on the page here. At the end, and I think it will be shared with everyone if it's not already, the very last slide is a list of references. So if you're interested in some of these, there's a lot more information you can go and read, and I really invite you to do that. The main point here is that diversity and inclusion used to be a nice thing to have for companies. Increasingly now, business leaders are seeing that this isn't a nice thing to have, it's a must thing to have. So how are organizations doing in terms of diversity and inclusion? The first piece of research I wanted to share is a really interesting study that found that ethnic minority candidates only had about half the chance of being invited for a job interview. Interestingly, this piece of research wasn't one study. It was what we call in academia a meta-analysis. So it looked at many, many, many different studies in different times, in different years, different decades, different countries, looking at different ethnic groups. And the results were always very, very similar. And you may think that possibly different people from different backgrounds have different opportunities, they would go to different schools, maybe there's a difference there. This research, actually, all of these pieces of research, what they did is they created a CV, a resume, and the only thing that they changed at the top of that resume was whether the name sounded like a white person's name or a black person's name. So the CV was the same in each of these things. They handed it to different companies. And even though you think when you read a CV, you don't pay attention to the name, that was the most important thing on that CV that people make decisions on, which is obviously quite depressing thought. Similar findings have been found looking at women, especially older women and ethnic minority women. So this has such a profound impact on the types of people we're bringing into our organizations because we're not even inviting certain people for interview. The result of this, currently in the USA, there are as many CEOs called John or Robert as all female CEOs combined. This is a piece of analysis that's done by Bloomberg, I think, but the reference is here. Last year, it was the same statistic, but it wasn't John and Robert, it was John and David. So in the last 12 months, it's been a very good year for Roberts, but it's not been a good year for women. So I'm really interested in looking at the history of the psychology and academic literature around discrimination. There was one theory that was really, really interesting about 75 years ago by Becker, who effectively was almost a thought experiment where they were able to show, well, if there were racist organizations and there were organizations that were not racist, and a lot of this research came out of the USA, looking at civil rights movements and looking at different outcomes for Black people and white people in America. If there were racist organizations, they would only hire white people. If there were organizations that were not racist, they would hire talented people. They would hire talented Black people and talented white people. And that would, for them, be a competitive advantage, that they would be getting employees from a larger candidate pool. And that might not make outcomes better for Black people tomorrow or next year, or even in 10 years. But eventually, you would expect that those organizations that didn't hire based on race would outcompete other organizations, and so ultimately racism would sort of die out. This theory has been around for 75 years, and that hasn't happened. Nothing has changed. And an interesting theory by Agnew and Kane in the 70s, so another old old theory on this, started bringing the ideas of stereotypes in. And what they were basically saying, if you had, let's, for example, say a leadership position, and you have a talented black woman with lots of experience, who's a very good culture fit for the organization, and a white man who just doesn't have the same experience, isn't as good a fit for the organization. In those situations, people would hire the better fit. They would hire the black woman. However, if you had a talented black woman and a talented white man, you would make decisions based on stereotypes because the situation is ambiguous. So you would base your decisions on what you see in leadership, and you look at leaders that exist and you see white men. So in those situations, you would then hire the white man. Interestingly, the authors here didn't make a distinction about whether that was a conscious decision on people or whether that decision was unconscious. Divine in the 80s, in a study now that is almost as old as me, found that both racist people and non-racist people are equally aware of negative stereotypes around race. Non-racist people will try to ignore these stereotypes. They won't want to make decisions based on those stereotypes. But what Divine was able to show that in, again, ambiguous situations, both groups of people are equally reliant on these stereotypes. So why do we rely on these stereotypes? Taking a step back from this, as a psychologist, it's interesting thinking how the brain works. The world is a complete mess of information, and your brain has to process this information. If you think right now about what you can see the screen in front of you, you can see your desk around you, you can see the wall in front of you, you can see possibly your legs, you can probably see your nose if you concentrate enough. You can hear my voice, but you can probably also hear, if the window's open, perhaps traffic outside. You can maybe hear your chair rustling or something like this. What can you feel? You can feel your clothes on top of you. You can feel the seat underneath you and the floor underneath your feet. There's a lot of information that you are aware of, but it never comes into your conscious mind. Your brain has to make decisions about what information is important and what information is not important, and so what you need to do to process that information. This is an interesting question, and I'm going to ask people to put answers in the chat. If you've seen this question before, I'd ask you to wait before you answer. And I'm not going to, I will read this out. The translation might be slightly different. A teapot and a cup cost 110 hays. The teapot costs 100 hays more than the cup. How much does the cup cost? Please drop things into the chat if you are brave, and think fast. Thank you, Raphael. First person to answer.
The only brave enough so far.
The only person brave enough, because I think people might know this is a trap. Few more people saying 10. The answer is 5. Sorry, Raphael. The answer is 5, and I will explain. So the cup costs 5, the teapot costs 105. The difference between 105 and 5 is 100, and 5 plus 105 is 110. So why do people think the answer is 10? That's the most normal response to have, and it doesn't mean that you got this wrong. It doesn't mean that you're less intelligent or anything like that. It means that your brain is working properly. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but before I do, and thank you for answering that. Our brain has 2 systems of thinking. System 1 thinking is very fast. it's unconscious, it's automatic. It doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't take a lot of effort. We use it for routine thinking, and it's the vast majority of all of our decision making. If I ask you, what is 2 plus 2? For most people, the answer 4 immediately comes into your head. You don't think about it, you don't take time, it's very, very easy. System 1 thinking is really useful. However, it is prone to errors and biases. System 2 thinking, on the other hand, is slow. We're consciously aware of it. It takes us time, and it takes us effort, and it takes us energy. We use it for complex thinking, but it's only a very small minority of our thinking. If I ask you what 45 times 37 is, if you're like me, you would probably want to get a pen and paper out, and you would need to calculate this. You would need to consciously think about it. It would take time, it would take effort, it would take energy. Maybe there's someone on the call who can give me an immediate answer to this. Amazing, but most of us wouldn't be able to do that. We need to use our system 2 thinking. Going back to this example, you see the numbers 110, you see the numbers 100, you see you need to make a difference between them. Your brain makes the mistake. It's a trick. Your brain thinks this is a simple problem, so you use your system 1 thinking, and you come up with 110, 100, the other thing must be 10. All of us think that's the first answer. That's our system 1 thinking, making a mistake. If we all take time over this and really think about this using our system 2 thinking, we would then come up with the correct answer, but it would be much slower. Our system 1 thinking is fantastic, but it's prone to making mistakes. It's prone to biases and errors. So thank you for answering that question. There's a few more tricks that I'm going to use as well. This is a really interesting one to demonstrate bias in system 1 thinking. If I ask you, this isn't a question that you can get wrong. This is just based on your opinions. So have a think, and again, I want you to put your answers in the chat. Would you prefer to win 900 highs or have a 90% chance of winning 1,000? I can see a few people are putting answers in the chat. Thank you. As you're thinking about this, I want you to think of the reason why that's your choice. Everyone so far is saying winning 900. Fantastic, thank you. I agree. Now, I'm going to ask you a second question. The reason, security, love that. I completely agree. For me, I would take the 900 because you definitely win. You definitely win 900. The other one, it'd be nice to win 1,000, but there's a chance you won't. And even though if you did this 100 times, statistically speaking, both options would be the same. However, yeah, but you're only doing this once, it makes sense to just take the money. Really good rationale here. I'm really enjoying this, thank you. Second question, would you rather lose 900 highs or have a 90% chance of losing 1,000? So would you prefer to lose 900 or have a 90% chance of losing 1,000? Drop your answers in the chat. And I agree with what everyone is writing. If you have your reasons why, please put those in the chat as well. Because you might not lose is one of the options. I completely agree. So What's interesting, I completely agree with everything that people have put in the chat. I would make the exact same decisions for the exact same reasons. If you look at these two questions next to each other, though, we've all picked different answers, but the question is the same. The only thing that changes is if the word is win or if the word is lose. This is actually a system one thinking bias. It's called the loss aversion bias. Our brains frame loss worse than gaining. So we will do anything we can to avoid losing. In these examples, we should pick the same answer, but we don't. The chat's quite good. I'm going to ask another question. If I now offered you a bet, and I flip a coin, and if the coin lands on heads, if it lands on one side, I give you 250 highs. And if the coin lands on tails, if it lands on the other side, you have to give me 100. So if it lands on one side, I give you 250. If it lands on the other side, you have to give me 100. If people could just comment in the chat, yes or no, if they would take that bet right now, if they want to do that bet. This always works, and it's fascinating. Our brains frame loss 2.5 times as bad as gain. And about 50% of people said yes, and about 50% of people said no. So that's our brains there. Half the people, so it's around 2.5 times that we're framing loss. So this is just cognitive bias. This is just system one thinking bias. In that situation of the flipping the coin, logically, we should take that. We should take the 250. Yeah, let's keep going. Let's bet. Let's gamble. But a lot of people still don't want to do it because we don't want to lose. The reason this is very interesting, it's not work relevant, but the reason I think this is very interesting is when I ask you why you make that decision, and everyone in the chat came up with very good, logical, rational reasons why you made these decisions. I'd rather win 900 because it's a guaranteed win. Yeah, 1,000 would be good, but I might lose, so let's just take the money. I want the 900. When losing, I don't want to lose, and there's a 10% chance I might not lose, so I'll go for that option. But this is bias. This is our system one thinking bias. But what's interesting is we can use our system two thinking to rationalize non-rational decisions. And that is interesting when we think about work. This next one then, I'm not going to read this out because I think my Portuguese pronunciation will be very bad. But I want you to have a read of this and have a think. How is this possible? I think this is quite a common puzzle. So if you've heard this before, wait a minute before you put it in the chat. So give people an opportunity to have a think about this. And if you have an answer, put it in the chat, please. Renato has got the right answer. This is the boy's mum. It's the boy's mother. Oh, Samantha, thank you so much for that. I was, when I was in the United Kingdom before this presentation, I was practicing with a colleague, with a friend, and I asked them this question in English. And they came up with the same answer. They have, the boy has two dads. And I thought for a minute, yeah, that works. More people saying mother. two fathers absolutely works. The boy can have two fathers. One of them was in the accident. One of them was not in the accident and was the surgeon. However, we're ignoring the very obvious answer, which many of you have got in the chat, is that the surgeon is the mother. A surgeon, a doctor, can be a woman. So many of you got this right answer. The two fathers answer is a very good answer, but it demonstrates something that we call implicit association bias. It's a lot easier for us to think of a surgeon as a man. It's a lot easier for us to think of a doctor as a man. There's a lot of really interesting research that Harvard University has done. These are called implicit association tests. There is a link at the bottom here. You can take these tests. There are many on this website. So if you get the slides, you can go to this link and take these tests. They're really, really, really interesting. You can see the results on many different tests. The classic study is the one that's on the left. So you have a word like engineering, and you have to as quickly as you can, say whether that is science or masculine, or liberal arts or feminine. And then you'll get another word. Maybe the word is biology, and you click science or masculine. And then maybe the word is mother. So you click liberal arts and feminine, and you keep going and you keep going. You have to answer very quickly. People are much quicker when they're relating science and masculine than when they're relating science and feminine. So people show that bias when they think science, they think male. The graph here it demonstrates that bias. So have a look at these tests. I remember taking one of these tests relating to do with sexuality. So on one side, you had to link heterosexual, straight, with words like moral or right or good. And on the other side, you had to relate words like gay, lesbian, homosexual, with words like immoral, disgusting, wrong. I took that test and I came out with a homophobic bias. The reason I wanted to share that is because I'm a proud gay man. I'm a proud gay man, but I'm still aware of the negative stereotypes around homosexuality, and they still influence my system one decisions. So what this means to say is that it's not men who are sexist, it's everyone who is sexist. It's not white people who are racist, it's everyone who is racist. It is not gay people, it's not straight people who are homophobic, it's all people. And it doesn't matter if we agree with these stereotypes. These stereotypes exist in our language and they influence our thinking. And it is very, very difficult to overcome these biases. So this is all of us. This affects all of our decision making. And in the real world, there's a lot of implications of this type of thinking. This is, I think, a very good point to demonstrate this. Two tennis players, John McEnroe and Serena Williams, both of them in tennis matches shouted at the umpire, at the referee. What was similar about these situations, as you can see in the picture, their behavior is the same. However, in the newspapers and on television the day after these events, how they responded, how the media responded was very different. He was the bad boy of tennis. He was passionate. He just wanted to win. He cared a lot about the match. She had just had a baby, so she had baby brain. She was emotional. It was an emotional outburst. Also, the fact that she was a black woman, the stereotypes that were coming through was these awful stereotypes around an angry black woman. The same behavior demonstrated by different people was viewed very differently. And this has a huge impact at work. The same behavior could be seen as being confident or as being vain, as being level-headed or as being passive, as being articulate or as being a gossip, as being flexible or as being scattered. And ultimately, the same behavior can be seen as competent or inept. These words here are not chosen at random. There's a link, number 12, to the reference here. This was a study based on 8,000 manager appraisals of their staff. The words on the left were significantly more likely to be used to describe men, and the words on the right were used significantly more to describe women. The way that we view people and the way that we see behavior is very different depending on who is performing that behavior. And this has a huge impact for trying to promote diversity and inclusion in your organization. When the same behavior is displayed by different people, we see them as differently. And this gets worse as well. There are different kinds of system one thinking biases that influence our decision making. Confirmation bias. We have a tendency to seek out information that agrees with our beliefs. And we tend to ignore information that doesn't agree with our beliefs. Affinity bias is we like people who look like us. And we tend to have an affinity with people who look like us. From an evolutionary perspective, this was probably a good thing. If someone looks like us, they're probably related to us. So there's a genetic incentive to help that person out. However, in the workplace, this is really inappropriate. If I was interviewing someone for a job in my team and they looked like me, they were a similar age, maybe they also had an accent from Manchester in England, they were dressed like me, they generally sounded and looked a lot like me, I would have this affinity with them. It would be unconscious. System one thinking is very quick, so immediately I would see them as like me and I would like them. When I'm asking them questions and when they're speaking, I would be listening to what agrees with that positive first impression. And I will be ignoring things that they say that doesn't agree with that positive impression. And this is shown in research. White people will ask Black applicants fewer questions in interview, and they will interview them for a shorter amount of time. They've already made up a decision, and it doesn't matter what the applicant says, because you've already decided that this is not a good candidate. These confirmation and affinity biases make themselves worse as well. If you think about when we're online and social media, we will seek out information and people that we like and that agrees with our own beliefs and identities. Social media will give us more of that back because that's what we're engaging with. So we only see opinions like us and we only see people like us. This is why Twitter is awful most of the time, because we will only see things like us, and so we live in these echo chambers and we don't see people who are different from us and different opinions from us, which is really bad for our decision making. But I'm not here to talk about Twitter, I'm here to talk about work. So what impacts do these biases, do our own cognitive biases that all of us have, what impact does that have at work? Everything. Every people decision we make is influenced by these biases. So to kind of conclude on this part, we have these two systems of thinking, system one thinking and system two thinking. They're both really useful. However, system one thinking is prone to biases and it over relies on stereotypes that aren't true. This influences all of our people decisions, and it's very difficult to suppress these unconscious biases. The main kind of takeaway here is that this is all of us, this is all of our decision making, and we cannot change it. You can, however, change processes. You can make processes more objective. So what can we do? I feel this is quite a bleak and pessimistic presentation, but there are a lot of positive steps and a lot of methods that have been used to promote diversity and inclusion in organizations. Now, this section, I want to be controversial. I want to be challenging. There are 9 things here that are all good ideas. However, I want to really get us to challenge them and question them. The reason for this is, 1, I think it's fun, but 2, 75 years of research into diversity and inclusion, and nothing has changed. We're still living in organizations that are predominantly male and white at the top. So we want to be able to, I want people to challenge and question everything that we're doing. So all of these things are good ideas, but do they actually work? So I want people to put in the chat for each one, if you think this really will help promote diversity and inclusion in your organization, I want you to say yes. So type into the chat yes if you think this particular thing will work. If you think no, put no in the chat and say, no, I don't think this is going to work. And if you think maybe, but maybe there's some questions around it that you're not sure about, put maybe in the chat. And I'm going to talk through these and I'm going to share some research. There's a lot of interest in research into each of these different areas. I'm looking at the time as well, because I want to make sure that we keep this to time, and I have quite a lot to talk about. The first one on the list, eliminating all male shortlists. So put in the chat if you think this is a good thing that will promote diversity and inclusion in your organization. Put in the chat yes. If you think it's not a good thing, put no. If you're unsure, put maybe or unsure. So what this is, when you have a few people that have applied for a job, the last few candidates, the final candidates that you're inviting for interview. I'm looking at the chat and no one has been bold enough to put anything yet. So yes, if you think it's great, no, if you don't. One person so far saying no. Unsure? No? I think you all know this is a trap. This is the trick. Fantastic. So I'm going to talk first about the all male shortlist, and I want to talk about this one. I put it in red because this is a no, and I want to explain what I mean. Obviously, having a shortlist of just male candidates is terrible for diversity and inclusion. There was a piece of research, I think it was looking at a recruitment company, and it was looking at all instances where 4 people were shortlisted for a job. If there were 2 women shortlisted and 2 men, a woman got the job 50% of the time, which is exactly what you would expect. If there was 1 man and 3 women, the man got the job 38% of the time. So if it's 1 in 4, you would expect 25, but 38, okay, fine. If 1 woman was on the shortlist and 3 men, the woman never got the job, so 0% of the time. So building diverse shortlists is very important. What was interesting about this piece of research, if you just have 1 token woman, our unconscious biases will not see that woman as a credible candidate, and she will never get the job. So the difficult thing for organizations is making sure those shortlists are truly diverse, that you have a 50-50 gender split, that you have a decent number of ethnic minority candidates. I see someone put in the thing, someone jumped ahead, and maybe I wasn't clear. The next one, flexible working for parents. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yes or no? Or unsure? Yes, someone saying. Resounding yeses. So I said I wanted to be controversial. I'm certainly not suggesting that parents don't deserve flexible working. Flexible working is fantastic for parents, especially mothers, and getting mothers back into work after having a child. However, some of the research has suggested if you just offer flexible working to parents, it doesn't work. For instance, if you think of an organization where mothers can get flexible working, okay, well, our team meeting is at 9 o'clock every Monday, and that's when the meeting is. Okay, well, I need to drop my child off at school at that time. I can't make that meeting. Oh, well, it's okay, we'll catch you up later. That is not great for inclusion. Flexible working should be for everyone. Then everyone in the organization will understand what flexible working is. If it is just parents, it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to actually truly work flexibly. So flexible working, fantastic. If it was flexible working for everyone, it would be a big green thumbs up, because that's fantastic. But yeah, I agree with you. Flexible working is fantastic for lots of different groups. However, flexible working for everyone. The next one, diversity training. So unconscious bias training. Try to train these kind of unconscious biases out of people. Yes, if you think that works. No, if you don't think it works. Some yeses, some not sures. This is really interesting. A lot of research has been done on this, and a lot of people do diversity training, unconscious bias training. The research suggests it doesn't work. There's many studies that found this doesn't work and it doesn't change. There was one interesting piece of research that found they used those Harvard University implicit association tests, and they found 1 week after doing the training, people would be slightly better, but then a month after, it's gone. There's no other kind of unconscious bias training that has been shown to work. So this isn't to say that in 5 years, 10 years, there'll be a new approach and something new will happen that will help. But certainly research right now suggests it doesn't work. So the message is you cannot train these biases out of people. I will still make biased decisions. However, if you make the processes around me objective, you can really help. Psychometrics. So do you think using psychometrics in an organization can help diversity and inclusion? So again, yes or no or unsure maybe. Quite mixed on this. Some really interesting comments there, thank you. Now, there may be a bias here because I work for a company that develops psychometrics, but I can justify this active research that we have done at Thomas. The very first study that I shared around CVs with either a black sounding name or a white sounding name, and that people are more likely to offer interviews to white candidates. We replicated this research at Thomas. We looked at ethnicity, and we also looked at gender, and we found the exact same things. People rated men higher, people rated white names higher, and the CV underneath was exactly the same. However, then we had another condition where we provided a very short bit of information about people's personality and intelligence, their psychometric information. It was very brief, just a few sentences. However, what we found was that was enough to reduce ambiguity in those situations, and people made less biased decisions. We presented this research, I think last year or the year before. I think COVID has made my brain forget when conferences were, but at the International Test Commission conference. So interestingly, even when the psychometric information was ambiguous, so the person was quite intelligent, they were quite extroverted, they were quite conscientious, but it wasn't very extreme. It was still enough so people knew more about the person and didn't rely on their name as much. So with anything, the more information you can give to decision makers, the better. So psychometric information will give decision makers more information, and they'll be less reliant on stereotypes because the information is less ambiguous. Of course, some psychometric companies have psychometrics that are biased. I would argue that most good established psychometric organizations like Thomas do a lot of research to ensure that our psychometrics are unbiased. but that's an important thing to look for, an important thing to ask. Shared parental leave. So this is becoming more common, but allowing men to take paternity leave instead of women taking maternity leave, or inviting them to share that leave. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or kind of unsure maybe? So I'm just going to pick up on two of the comments. Someone is asking you to suggest some tests. Effectively anything that is looking at someone's behavior or personality or cognitive ability is going to be good. And the important thing to do is ask the psychometric provider to show that those tests aren't biased. So we do all that research at Thomas. Personally, when I'm recruiting, I use the Thomas PPA to look at people's behavioral styles, because that's really useful, especially onboarding people. I will use our GIA to understand their cognitive ability, how quickly they're going to learn on the job. And I will use our HPTI assessment to understand their personality, which looks at a broad amount of things that have all been shown to be predictive of success at work. I would not like to make any decisions myself without all three of those assessments, because the more information you have, I know the less biased I'll be. So I would certainly suggest looking at the more you use the less biased decisions you'll be making. Someone has asked around shared maternity and paternity leave, how that works. It's quite complicated. So what needs to happen is the mother's company and the father's company need to both have the policy of shared maternity leave. Then their HR departments need to speak to each other. They need to make an agreement to say, okay, well, instead of you having 6 months off, you have 3 months off, you have 3 months off. I think there might be, I'm not sure about Brazil, but I think in the UK there are tax implications that you need to think about as well. So it's not an easy thing to do. But the idea is that you're going to be, meaning that men can look after the children more, and it's not then women out of the workplace for a long period of time. Interesting, someone said, as a mother, I don't think this works. A lot of people saying unsure. It sounds like a fantastic idea. I think maybe the way I described it was sort of betraying what the answer is here based on the research. If it worked, it would be fantastic. If men and women took the same amount of time off, it would be fantastic, because then that means that no one is disadvantaged. Both groups of people, men and women, are out of the workplace for the same amount of time. However, there is a social stigma around men taking time off to look after children. So even when organizations have put a lot of effort into doing this, the reality is men don't take it. So it's a great idea. I think there are wider societal problems that mean that this might not work. It might not do what you want it to. But really interesting. Thank you for all the comments as well. It's the reason I want to do this, and the reason I want to make this a bit controversial, is because it's really important for us to challenge these good ideas. And so thank you for getting involved and engaging with this. The next one, encouraging salary negotiations. So when you're recruiting for a new role, if you put in the job advert, salary is negotiable, or if you don't put salary is negotiable, will that help diversity and inclusion, or will it not help diversity and inclusion? The main aspects we're speaking to here is gender pay gaps and ethnic pay gaps. Just looking, so drop in the comments, yes, if you think it's a good thing. Looking at time, we're going to move a little bit more quickly. This is actually a fantastic thing. It doesn't sound like it would be, because you would think if you encourage salary negotiations, the people negotiating are going to be men, because you think of salary negotiations and you think of that behavior as being more male. The same behavior by different groups of people is seen differently, and we're all aware of this. And what that means is women are less likely to negotiate salary, because a woman negotiating salary might be seen as difficult or challenging or disrespectful, whereas a man might be seen as understanding their worth, and they're probably worth that salary. When you don't say salary is negotiable, men negotiate salary more in interviews than women. If you make it clear that salary is negotiable, women negotiate salary just as much as men, which is obviously then better for gender pay gaps. Obviously, if this is difficult and your company cannot do this, be clear about what you can and can't do. Next one, diverse selection panels. So if you are recruiting for a new job and you have 3 people from your organization interviewing, do you think having diversity in that group of 3 people is good, not good, maybe? Thanks for the comments. So I said I wanted to be controversial. This one is really interesting. If you have diversity in your organization at all levels, it is a really great thing, as people are saying in the comments. Anyone applying for a job at your organization will see you are diverse, you respect diversity. Also, a double bonus of that is diverse groups make better decisions. So those 3 people are more likely to make a better decision about the candidate. However, if you don't have diversity, what tends to happen is you might have 2 senior men and 1 junior woman. That doesn't give off the same impression. Then the person going into the interview will see you promote men. So if you have diversity, fantastic. If you don't try and fake it. Just quickly on that as well, there's some anecdotal research that suggests that senior Black women say that they spend all of their time in interviews because they're always using the diverse person of a senior Black woman to bring into interviews. So again, really good idea if you can do it, but needs thought. Like all of these things, it needs thought to make sure it's done well. I'm going to touch on the last 2 together because I wanted to end on a positive note. Both of these things are fantastic things to do for diversity and inclusion, and this is the real key takeaway. Make all of your processes objective. When you have a new job that you're putting out there, have a very clear job description, have a very clear process for the interviews. Who are you going to bring to interview? What's the criteria? What are you going to ask people in those interviews? How are you going to make decisions on those interviews? And then when someone joins the organization, have a clear level structure, have a clear salary structure, so that people know to get the next progression, I need to be demonstrating this capability, and this capability, and there needs to be a position available. But then you're making it crystal clear what those decisions are going to be based on. So then people making those decisions will base those decisions on the criteria that are objective and fair, not on unconscious biases. Absolutely, someone has just picked up the same amount of, yeah, if you would say exactly the same thing for minorities, completely agree with that comment. Oh, someone's making an interesting point about salary negotiations not being common in Brazil. Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, my perspective is that of an English person. It is more common to negotiate salary. England right now especially has lots of quite big labor shortages. So a lot of people interviewing are being more demanding. So negotiating salary is becoming a lot more common. Interesting, different perspective in Brazil. So thank you for sharing that. I'm looking at time, and I could talk about this absolutely all day long. If there are any questions, we only have a minute left. If there's anything else that people would like to comment or jump on. Just want to say as well that a lot of this research is really interesting. If you love this as much as me, please have a look at some of these references. Anything else to pick up on?
Yeah, great, Stephen. Thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun and knowledge. Thanks for sharing everything with us. We just got a message in the chat here in the beginning, and I'll make this observation with you so you can share your thoughts with the audience. So one of the attendees said that, and I will literally translate what he's trying to say here. So I'm going to bring my reflection in Portuguese, and if it's possible, you do the translation, I would be appreciated. So I'm translating now. So all this data are based in a society built majority by hetero white men with no incapacity, handicapped people.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So it's very difficult to follow all this data, all this proposal, because the culture is not the one who can see all these things that the data is trying to get. So with all the respect, with the job, with the work, in the end, he said about it.
So if is this talking about disability?
No, he's talking about that all the data that we collect in all the work has been done. It's been done with people that will live in a society that's majority ruled by white straight men.
Yes. The vast majority of the research I have shared has been conducted primarily by white straight men, typically middle class, upper class people as well. So academics that have more privilege and more opportunity. It's a very good point and a very interesting point to make. When we conduct research at Thomas, we do have diversity in terms of our researchers. And so I happen to be a white man speaking now, but the team of researchers that we work with are quite diverse. We make sure we get different perspectives and different people speak at events like this as well. But it's really important to consider that lens. Even though this is talking about these things, I'm trying to bring color to some of this research and try to bring perspectives on why these things might be the case. But even me as a white man needs to accept my limited perspective. As well as looking at the research and the academic research, it's important to also hear from the voices of people from different groups and their lived experiences. My perspective is that of a psychologist, and you're completely right in saying that there is a bias in terms of who gets research published and whose voices get listened to. Academia is really bad for this. So thank you for making that point.
But I believe that in the end, the message is all our decisions are biased.
Yeah.
So if you can use as many things to make an objective and better decision, will be better for the business. Absolutely. So it doesn't matter where coming from your bias. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It will be biased. So use objective tools, objective systems that help you to make better decisions.
Definitely. The message is still clear, but I think there is a lack of a voice of different groups of people, especially in academia and in the workplace and everything else. But I completely agree. The message is still the same, that all of our bias, all of our decision making is going to be subject to these unconscious biases. Whatever you can do to make decision making more objective, give people more information, make processes more structured and unbiased, then that's ultimately going to be helpful. But it is a very good point to make that, so thank you for making that point.
Great. Does anyone has any other question? Again, we'll share with you this video. You already got the presentations. If anyone hasn't got yet, please send a message to us and we'll send to you. If there's any other questions, I should thank Stephen for sharing everything with us. It was really good to have you here with us. Help celebrate 30 years Thomas here in Brazil. It's really glad to have you here with us and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
And please, everybody, smile we'll take a picture with everybody here in the room. So please show me your best smile. I don't know how to take pictures. A lot of beautiful faces. Great. Let me see if it works. If not, I'll ask again. Great. Thanks a lot. It's been a great honor to have the opportunity here, Stephen, again. Bye-bye. Have a great week.
Thank you very much. Goodbye now.